We have our next presenter here, Dr. Leroy Littlebear. If I could ask him to start making his way here to get ready to share with you some information today. I'm going to introduce him just a little bit, and he can introduce himself a little bit more if he wishes. But I was looking on the internet for some bios for him, and the one that I came across that I liked the best is posted on the Inspire website. And this is how they describe Dr. Littlebear, which I thought was very appropriate. Leroy Littlebear has himself become an institution. This veteran educator and renowned academic is a model for all Aboriginals striving for success in higher learning. The founder of the Native American Studies Department at the University of Lethbridge, where he served as chair for 21 years, also went on to become the founding director of Harvard University's Native American program. He's co-authored 3 texts: Pathways to Self-Determination, Native Indian Leaders' Perspectives on Self-Government, Quest for Justice, Aboriginal Rights in Canada, and Governments in Conflict, Province and Indian Nations in Canada. And he's helped write Justice on Trial, the report of Alberta's Task Force on the Criminal Justice System and its impacts on the Indian and Métis people of Alberta. A member of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Littlebear contributed to publications for the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People in the area of criminal justice issues, did the same for the Assembly of First Nations on constitutional issues, and has provided legal advice to numerous Aboriginal organizations on land claims, treaties, hunting, and fishing rights. So as you can see from that short description, he's very respected and very knowledgeable and brings today some important information to share with you today. Welcome, Dr. Littlebear.
Thank you very much for that introduction. First of all, I want to apologize for coming in late. My cab driver wasn't a very good member of the steering committee. But really, there was a little fender bender on 109th and Jasper, and that slowed everything down. I wanted to come and talk to you about oil and gas. Seriously. These 2 old guys were talking and heard it. One of the guys told his friend, "Oil just went down again." The other guy said, "Oh, that's not unusual. The oil in my old pickup truck is always going down." When I pull into the service station, I tell them to check the fill the oil and check the gas. I'm very honored to be with you this morning, and I'm very glad that we're all here to talk about important things such as education. Too often, we just take it for granted that it really is, that it happens, that we just see our children go out the door, get on a school bus, and that they are getting an education. But we never stop and really think about the type of education our kids are really getting. as opposed to the kind of education that they should be getting and that they're entitled to. If we were to stop and think about what does education really mean? What does it really mean? It doesn't really mean grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and on up the ladder. What it really means is the older generation, and I think I can include myself in that, we, the older generation, passing the collective knowledge of our people down to those younger kids, to our younger people. That's what education is about. If you don't do that, if we don't pass that knowledge to the younger generation, we are going to, our way of life, I should say, is going to go the way of the dinosaurs. Will disappear. In other words, there's going to be no more Cree language, Cree ways, no more Blackfoot, and so on. Incidentally, talking about those kind of ways and so on, incidentally, you know, our NDP government here in Alberta are wanting to reduce what you call carbon footprint. That's part of their environmental program, the carbon footprint. And again, those two old guys I was telling you about the oil, one of them was saying, what kind of carbon footprint do you leave? The other guy says, I don't know because I'm not Blackfoot. So, education, as we said, is the passing down of that collective knowledge of our people to our children. That's what education is. What is that collective knowledge? Well, let me try and explain to you what that collective knowledge is about in terms of what we keep bringing up, and everywhere we go, we talk about a treaty right to education. What is that treaty right? Well, most of us talk about the treaty right because we can come up with a piece of paper, in other words, the treaty, and we say, read this, the treaty. It says that the government promised education to us, and that they're supposed to pay for our schooling. That's what most of us think of when we talk about a treaty right to education. Well, as we were saying, when we see those kids go get on the school bus or walk to school, what is it that they're getting? I'm quite sure they're not getting any Blackfoot or Cree or Dene. So, when we talk about a treaty right to education, what does it really mean? Well, the Supreme Court of Canada has said many times now, we will interpret those treaties, like Treaty 8, the way the Indians understood the treaty at the time of signing. We will interpret those treaties the way the Indians understood them at the time of signing. Have we done our homework? In other words, how did our chiefs that signed the treaty, how did they understand the treaty? How did they understand that education clause that said the government is going to pay for the schools or send you teachers? How did we understand it? Well, the only way you can really begin to think of that understanding on the part of our people when they signed that treaty and what it meant to them is to shift into a Cree mode, a Dene mode, a Blackfoot mode of thinking. That's the only way we would ever get close to how our people understood the treaty and the right to education. So what is that Native thought process? Well, let me try and explain it. And I don't know if it'll come across very well because I end up having to do it in English. It'd be much better if we were to explain it in Cree, in Dene, in Blackfoot. But let me try to do the best in English. The Native way of thinking, and this is very, let me back up and say that if somebody were to ask you, what is and what do you mean by Indian? It's hard to explain. And it's not everybody can simply rattle off and say, this is what Indian, this is what Cree is all about. It's a tough job to do. But in spite of that, let's see if we can have at least some good idea about it. And that is, when we think about it, the native way consists of a number of aspects. The first aspect of the native way of thinking is that everything is always in constant motion. Things never stop. Okay? Things are always in what I refer to as constant flux, changing all the time. Okay? That's why I jokingly refer to trying to make an appointment with a Cree. If I try to make an appointment with a Cree Indian, they'll tell you, yeah, I'll be there at 2 o'clock. But if I don't show up, I'm over at my grandma's. If you don't see my horse over there, or if you don't see my old pickup truck, I'm over at my uncle's. That's it. Well, that's an articulation of the fact that because things are always changing, we can never predict what's going to happen. Because things are always changing. Okay? That's the reason, see, very different from Western thought that says, hey, you're supposed to be here at 2 o'clock. Just like this morning. Hey, I was supposed to be here at 9:15, but that constant motion, that constant flux, I didn't know about that little accident, fender bender on 109th and Jasper. So, that's a very different way of thinking. I always have tongue-in-cheek when I get invited to go do a presentation 2 years from now. People ask me, can you come on such and such a date? And I tell them, yeah, right now it looks like it's okay, but call me the week before, because I never know what's going to happen in between. So part of the native way of thinking is this constant change that's always there. Okay. The second part of the native thought process is that everything is about spirit. That's why we get referred to about spirituality. For non-Indians, for Westerners, for them, everything is about material object. Okay? For us, it's always about spirit. The third part of it is that everything is alive. Everything is animate. Okay? This water is animate. Even these tables are animate. That's why we hear our elders talk about and refer to what is now almost rhetorical, all my relations. In fact, when we're talking about all my relations, we're not even talking about humans. All my relations are those birds out there, those trees out there, those bears, those rocks out there. They're all my relations. That's what we're trying to relate to. This, of course, includes the land. We're trying to maintain a balance amongst them. In Western thought, the only thing that's animate is, of course, we human beings are animate. And maybe those animals are animate. But are those trees animate? For the majority of Westerners, they're inanimate. And of course, the rock is definitely inanimate. But see, for us, everything is alive. Everything has spirit. And because everything has spirit, that's why we talk about all my relations. And so, naturally, it follows that from that type of thought, that another aspect of our way of thinking is relationships. Everything is related. Okay? Those rocks, those trees, humans, those animals, everything is interrelated. In Western thought, we tend to work towards isolation. We isolate things down to single points. But in the native way of thinking, everything is related. Because everything is related, guess why? We're always talking about holistic, a holistic approach. Because see, deep in our system, we're thinking about this relationship. So we can never talk about things just in isolation. We're always talking about the relationship, the holistic approach. And that has lots of implications for education. Now, another aspect of the native way of thinking is the notion of renewal. Renewal is very important. Why? Well, let me give you two perspectives on the notion of renewal. You know, in order for you and I to exist on this earth, in order for you and I to exist, things have to be just right. In other words, there just has to be ideal conditions for humans to exist. If those ideal conditions don't exist, or any one of those ideal factors are removed, we wouldn't last very long. And if you don't believe that, stop breathing for 10 minutes. In other words, take oxygen away. See if you last. In other words, oxygen is one of those ideal conditions that has to exist. Even our body temperature has to be just ideal. What is it? 37 centigrade, 37 Celsius, somewhere in there. If your body temperature were to drop by 10 degrees, or to rise by 10 degrees, and it stayed there, you wouldn't last long either. So the point is, for us to continue to exist as humans, there has to be ideal conditions. Well, if you looked at it from a slightly different perspective, it begins to say that our science, that is native science, is geared towards sustainability, trying to maintain those conditions that make for our existence. A good example of another being, one of our relatives, that has been able to do that is the fish. See, the fish has been around way before the dinosaurs. Dinosaurs came into existence. Well, they're gone. But the fish is still around. We, as humans, just came up on the scene not very long ago. Well, if we don't maintain those conditions, we're going to go the way of the dinosaur. So, in other words, it's a realization. Our way of thinking is a realization. If I'm going to continue to exist as a human being, I have to maintain those conditions that make for my existence. That's where the notion of renewal comes in. It comes in because I have to continue renewing those factors, those conditions that make for my existence. If we were to look at our ceremonies, probably 80-90% of our ceremonies are renewal ceremonies. They're all about renewal. We do them over and over and over again. We sing the same songs over and over again. We tell the same stories over and over again. And as of late, we even tell the same jokes over and over again. We all know the punchline, but we still have a good laugh about it. That's what we mean by renewal. See? Now, in Western thought, the best way to put it, without going into a long explanation about it, is Been there, done, did it. Let's move on. And this, we can use grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 as an example. If I'm in grade 5 and I ask a grade 3 question, what will the teacher tell me? You should have known that in grade 3. We're in grade 5. In other words, been there, done, did it. Get with the program. See? Whereas our way is we're always renewing. We renew the knowledge. We renew the songs. We renew the ceremonies. See? Other audiences, and in fact, not too long ago with another audience, I was telling them an example of that is, I was using as an example a young couple. They'd been married for a while, maybe the honeymoon period is over. But one morning, over Starbucks coffee or Tim Hortons, the wife tells her husband, you have changed. And he sees something coming and he digs his heels and what do you mean I've changed? And she says, when we were dating, when we were courting, you used to bring me the flowers. You used to bring me the gifts. You don't do that anymore. And he says, I married you, didn't I? Well, see, if you just stop there, what is the wife talking about? She's talking about renewal. The renewal of the love. And for him, hey, it was a one-shot thing. I married you. You do your thing. I'll go play golf. See, that's a big difference in thinking. So in the same way that love has to be renewed all the time, well, so does knowledge also has to be renewed. If you don't, you forget about it. So renewal is very important. Whereas in Western thought, as we said, been there, done, did it. Get with the program, let's move on. A very different perspective. And then, of course, we have all of that way of thinking is captured in our languages. The language acts as a repository, for the knowledge of our people. So there's lots of knowledge just in the language itself. Very different from, English is a language, French is a language, but Cree, Blackfoot, Dene have a very different approach. See, in English, we always, if you're speaking English and thinking in English, you are always having to refer to the other. Why? Well, if you take an ordinary English sentence, you'll see that the English sentence is structured on A is or equals B. That's the English sentence structure. A equals or A is B. Well, from a Blackfoot way of thinking, and I'm sure it's the same in Cree, let's say, if A equals B, the question is, then why do you need B? See? All you need is A. You don't need B. But see, the English language structure is such that you always have to have A equals B. See? And so, in their way of thinking, you always need the other. Way back during the Constitution days, we were trying to get the government officials to talk about and, really define what's Canadian. And they couldn't do it. The best answer we got from the government officials was when we asked them, what's Canadian? They said, we're not American. That was their definition. In other words, they couldn't define who they were. They needed the other, the Americans, to define who they are. So the language makes a whole lot of difference in terms of the ways of thinking. I often give the example, which is a Dene language, Navajo. In Navajo, this linguist actually did the count, and he tried to conjugate just a simple verb in English. The simple verb was to go. Okay? The verb to go. Not to the can. But when he asked the Navajos, how many different ways can you say to go in Navajo? They started to count. You know how many different ways? 356,000 different ways. You begin to see how rich our languages are. In other words, to be able to say, to go 356,000 different ways. For comparison, the official Oxford English Dictionary does not quite contain 1 million words, just under 1 million. Well, it would only take 3 Navajo sayings to surpass the Oxford English Dictionary. Well, so when we're talking about education, those are the kind of things that I'm talking about. Are they being passed down to that younger generation? The last part of the native way of thinking is, of course, the land. The land becomes important because it's a reference point. In this constant motion, constant change that takes place, well, even though the land will eventually change, at least for the time being, it's the most stable reference point. That's the reason why you and I are forever talking about the land. In all our relationships with Westerners, we're talking land. See, for them, land don't mean anything. To them, land is just like this glass. It's just another commodity. For them, the most important referent in their mind is time. The most important referent in our minds is place, the land. So, when you put and bring together all these different aspects of native thought, of Cree thought, constant change, the spirit, everything being alive, everything being related, things having to be renewed, all of that being caught in my language with a major referent, the land. I wonder what those spokespeople that we refer to as chiefs that signed the treaty, from that point of view, I wonder how they understood the treaty, and more specifically, how did they understand and what were their understanding about what we call education. Well, one of the things that for me, when I'm thinking about it in Blackfoot, I begin to say, geez, you know, our education system, the way we taught our children and what we passed down to them was lifelong learning. Because you always have to be on your toes because of this constant change that might occur. See? You always have to be on your toes. We always have to be learning something new. Because if things change, then we have to be there to make the adjustments. See? That's the reason why in our customs, we are what I refer to as generalists. Jack of all trades, master of none. We know a little bit about everything. Know a little bit about everything. And that makes us adaptable, so on, go with the changes and so on. See, whereas in Western society, if you ask them, who are you? What are you? They'll tell you, I'm a teacher. I'm a plumber with pipe dreams. I'm a lawyer. See, in other words, they identify themselves by a specialty. It's specialization. So in other words, the education that we send our children to We're all training them to be specialists. We're all training them to be consumers. That's why in today's news, all they're talking about is economics. Economics. That's all they talk about. And that's what the whole education system, Western education system, is geared to. Well, if they followed a little bit of our way, it would be about sustainability. It would be about balance and harmony. That's what our education system would be about. And of course, as the TRC was emphasizing over and over again in their report, you've got to teach the language. And boy, we're starting to lose out on that. The TV and the iPads are too much of a competition. So, when we're talking treaty right to education, it seems to me it's from that perspective, that native thought, that we have to come at it from. Right now, as we said, we just see our kids getting on the school bus. We really don't have a good idea of what it is that's being passed on to them in the classroom. We just take it for granted that they're getting the education that we'd like to see them have. So, in your packets, I've wrote up a little article on what I've been talking about, but you also have in them, a position paper that Dale and others have been talking about, this treaty right to education, and the position that our people have been taking with regard to education, whether it be through the MOUs and so on we have with the province. Well, when we talk education, it has to be from that native understanding of what that right to education is about. And the TRC is reminding us about that. And to end off, I would say this is an opportune time to try and live up to that type of education that we'd like to see our kids have, the kind of things that Dale and others have been talking about for a long time now. Why? Well, because this is the first government, that is the Liberal government, the federal government, this is the first government in a long time that has said, we want a new relationship. We want a relationship that's based on reconciliation. Well, here's our chance. What should that new relationship based on reconciliation look like? What should it consist of? We have a chance to come forward. And that's the reason why I'm very, very glad, very happy that people like you are coming together to talk about education the way it should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Littlebear, for sharing and reminding us of the wisdom of our people and giving us some important starting points in thinking about the kind of discussion we're going to have today about education. Maybe I can open up the floor and give people an opportunity to comment or ask a question if they like. While we have Dr. Littlebear here, I'll entertain some questions or comments for 10 or 15 minutes.
Hello, my name is Alice Martin, elder for Mixo Tree and APC. I'm truly honored to have heard your speech and really glad that we have someone like you in our community that's still alive and teaching us the old ways. We truly appreciate the knowledge that you have and what you have shared today. However, I have a question, and I am looking to you as an educator to help me understand, because of my position, my experience in my life, and the things that I've had to do in relation to bringing that thought process within the system that I've been working in. In my lifetime, my experience, I've been labeled as a troublemaker, always working against the system and all that stuff. And it is because of this that I'm here today and this question. And I believe that our Creator works in mysterious ways, and for us it's truly important that I ask this question because I'm sure a lot of the people here have had the same experience. Now, when we say that we have our own way of doing things, our own way of knowing, it means to me that we were put on earth as pre-DNA Blackfoot. And we have our own way of doing things, beliefs and value system, and our spirituality. In regards to education, yesterday I've heard many people say that what we need to do is to create our own education system from our own way of knowing. Then we have established partnerships. And partnerships are very important in the work that we do and in society, because we need to balance, today we need to balance the system's way and our way so that we can move forward. However, my question is, when we had our partner come here yesterday, one of our partners at University of Calgary, come in here and say that they are trying to establish an Aboriginal or an indigenous way of knowing within their system. My question is, how can we, with our own way of knowing, how can they, I guess, with their system's way of knowing, then develop something that is our own? Because I don't see a good fit. For me, it's us again having to fit within their system. So that's the kind of the dilemma. That's my question. And because of my position and my experience again, if I went to one of their meetings, let's say, and went to their development of that indigenous way of knowing within the university setting, I would be seen as going against the university again. So, how can we, people like myself, move forward in what we're trying to do?
Thanks very much for the question. Let me answer it this way, and it comes back to the notion about language. I'll use language as an example to try and answer your question. See, in English, when you're thinking in English, and English is such that it's what I refer to as a polarized language. It's polarized in the sense that you always come up with either or, okay, either or. And that either or reflects in things like good and bad, saint and sinner, day and night, black and white, so on. You can go down the list. See, it's always what you would call a dichotomy. Or if you wanted to use computer lingo, you would say it's binary. It's binary thinking. So that you cannot be a sinner and a saint at the same time. See, you're always either or. Okay? Well, see, in native thought, we don't think that way. See, our thinking is more like, there's a little bit of good and there's a little bit of bad. Nobody is totally good, nobody is totally bad, There is that, if you want to call it, flexibility and phases and so on. Okay. So, from that point of view, from that way of thinking, that is, from an English point of thinking, in institutions like University of Calgary, U of A, U of L, where I'm at, and so on, hey, that type of thinking is very, very prevalent, okay? And so when we come in and we say, we'd like to see these things taught in the university, they look at them from either or. See, they look at them from either or. Whereas when we're talking holistic approach to education, what holistic really means is continual adjustments, tweaking of something over here. If some new development, remember the constant motion, the constant change. When something happens over here, we should be able to tweak the system, fine-tune it. But it's always looking at the whole picture, see. Whereas they have a hard time with that because they approach this way of thinking, native thought. If you try to include it, they always approach it from either or. They're thinking that we're telling them, you have to stop everything that you guys do and adopt this. And when they think about it from that point of view, they dig their heels in. See, they don't want to make the adjustments because they're thinking in either or fashion. Whereas our way is always saying, let's make little adjustments to fit a particular development, a particular situation. So that's a kind of problem we run into in these institutions of higher education like U of C.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the prayer. My name is David Kennedy from Chopin Prairie. I had a question, not question, but direction a little bit for the gentleman who was down there before you, and also a couple of words by you, because it's getting harder for me sitting here to hold on by thinking. You're talking about thinking lots, because I got thinking problems. And I've never been in school in my life. I talk English a little bit rough. But I had a question for that fellow or direction. They wanted something by this evening sometimes. How could it be done for education system? I think he's got some knowledge a little bit. Also, Dale Oasis may be part of you. Those kind of people, if they know about a little bit education, because I don't know, I think those people should have some answer that would take the route to lead people for young generation. When we talk about the right of education, I raised by my grandpa. My grandpa raised me. He was there when the sign authority was. And he showed what the way he understands. Some of you mentioned that, the way they understood translation to the white society. When we signed, the grandpa said when he signed the paper, it was already something was wrong. The commissioner, he signed the paper, not that he didn't sign it, he shook hands. He's holding his hand, you see them on the stamps right here. He's holding his hand, one side, and commissioner say, you see, as far as we see the land over there to the sky, we'll share with you. Before you let go the hand, he's talking about who's the boss already, commissioner. The old man said, how can I be the boss before I let go of your hand? I'm not satisfied yet. I won't let you go. And then you came up with spirit. I heard that a couple times this morning. I kind of understand that. The spirit to me, the power of Indian people. The spirit means, on the other hand, a religion, Catholic, they talk about spirit, the priest do. Education and the power means to me, education means the non-boundary to teach our kids, generation to come. The gentleman talked about option. The province has the power, all of it, the way it sounds like it. And the province wasn't there when the grandpa shook the hand over the education system. And the boundary in reserve, we have no jurisdiction to the government to tell us what to do. And he talks about option. If we let go to the option, he'll take the way he thinks, not the way we want. And back to that Constitution issue, in 1985, I believe I was around that time. Before you take on Constitution home, make sure everything stays in the way it does before, the way we understand it, leave them in there. Nothing changes. Because the government, when he saw that 21 promises, only time he can do some work on it when the Constitution bring home. Finally, the White brothers won, and he brought it back to Canada. Now he's just shifting back and forth any way they want. I told them, make sure it's in there before you move it. It's very hard for us, First Nation people, we have jurisdiction. When Grandpa signed the paper, who shook hand on it, there was no jurisdiction. Oh Canada, our native land. You talk about Canadian. I am a Canadian. Those are Canadian. First Nation people are Canadian. That was our bloodline to Mother Earth. I think it's very hard to accept sometimes the way education system are going, the way we've been treated. Are we Indian people? It's hard to teach that much. The way they treat us in school, a missionary school, residential school. Do we hard to teach Indian people that way? Did we need that kind of treatment to get our education like that? On top of that, the province has all jurisdiction now. We got option and reserve. What do we have? I'm talking about Canada. No jurisdiction. That's what we deal with. If we want something to be changed, we'll be there. 1933, surrender. Surrender means when you did something bad, you surrender. That's what I understand in my life, my mind. How do you think old man, grandpa would surrender for a pound of beans and baking powder? Baby. How do you think grandpa would think? You think he'll do that? I don't think so. 1933, some of them. And when they surrendered, there wasn't consultation with Indian people at all. Not even Indian affair. There was two government, that's all. We weren't involved. So education means it's about human life. How to think, how to do some work, and how to raise a family. That's what I have. The way of life of Indian people, I got degree in there. But then classroom, not by residential school either. Because it's hurt. It's hurt when you start thinking about it. I have 9 kids, me and my wife. One of them sitting right there. I raised them in a top line. I don't know nothing about education. My wife do. They're all graduate, 9 of them. One candle in the shop. They didn't have to go to residential school to learn that. No force. They learn by themselves. Every time correspondent, they take a teacher, they pass. Today they're all something. So the residential school, it hurt us, and it will never go away. Do we need that kind of jurisdiction? Do we need that kind of education? Do Grandpa, I don't think he signed paper for that kind of for that kind of treatment, education. They threw us Indian people. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. And it really, it really brings out that difference in understanding that we have with Westerners and so on. But I would add, you're talking about jurisdiction. The province of Alberta does not have exclusive jurisdiction. Doesn't. Because when you come back and look at it from a treaty point of view, see, if I can back up a little bit and say that all cultures, all peoples have an education system. Okay? Have an education system. We all have our ways. There's Blackfoot ways, there's Cree ways, and so on, how we educate our people. Okay. When it came to treaty, the government said, we will provide the schools. Okay. Well, what I've been talking about is our people were of the mindset that they were going to teach, and these schools were going to teach our ways. That's what the thinking was. It was not a surrender of jurisdiction. It was just that, hey, somebody's going to teach our ways to our children. So what we get caught up in is an argument between the federal and provincial governments. The federal government, because of treaty and so on, and because of Section 9124 in the Constitution, talks about Indians and lands reserved for Indians. But then the federal government turns around and says, hey, you, the province, have jurisdiction over education in the Constitution. You should be paying for Indian education. And the province turns around and says, yeah, that's true, but you are responsible for Indians. You should be paying. So it's really not about jurisdiction, it's really about who pays. Okay? And that's the argument we get caught up in, that debate between the feds and the provinces. Well, one of the latest Supreme Court decisions, it comes out a little bit in the Chilcotin case and in the Kuwaitan case, where the Supreme Court basically has said, the crown is the crown is the crown is the crown. In other words, they didn't quite use that lingo, but that's basically what they meant. The crown is the crown is the crown. Meaning, the province is as much the crown as the federal government. So, it's the crown that's responsible for these treaty promises. So in other words, federal government or provincial government, when it comes to paying for that treaty promise, are both responsible. Okay. So that's the latest development in education right now. But too often in the past, we get caught in this. But from our point side of the fence, we never gave up the jurisdiction. It was just that somebody else, because of the treaty, they were going to pay for the cost of the education. We didn't give up the jurisdiction. And so that's why I say the federal government nor the provincial government does not have exclusive right over Indian education.
I would like to recognize Chief Noski to ask a question or make some comments, and then an elder sitting over here waiting. And just to let you know that how we're going to continue is after the elder has a chance to ask a question and Dr. Littlebear has a chance to respond, we are going to have a little bit of a break, and then we're going to move into the MOU presentation and adjust the agenda a little bit. I'm trying to be as going with the flow as I can here, but also respectful of the people who are here with things to talk about with each other and also information to share. So, Chief Noski.
Alihi wakita, Iba nga ako sa Magayan. Mas kinigil iso yan, papagis na mo. Tanssitism asian, tanssitism tehtävä muussa. Kiva, että saa pahtavan tanssituhtavan tanssi jo piskuisi. Isit maskin, man sitä ekskiita man ohtsi, ekskiiti tanssita tuota kuin päin. Muiden tihtiineen, kospiuskinikin suojaan jäänyt tällä vuonna mui pitäisi aina muussa ei saa, ja piekon yksi. Mä tiedän, kieltäkin on tehtävä niin yksi naama sun säkä. Kivaika dohti, kun itse koko kivaika ei vapahtanut. Tapskuudesta nohti sellaisen snoovuteksi naamaa ja kivaiksi kiittää, kaivaiseksi naamaa sun. Naamaa sun kivain stohtavan, eikö kiittävän, kun tanssastettiin istuutavan. Apuu tanssitisi piiksi, kuin nivuksi naamaa sun. Kiva ei kun ne puhutaksi tästä tiikoa, ei kun niitä kiva kun tapskuudesta. Kun ikäkään kiva, piki voi kitskää haastavissa kitskuuhti, nämäkin kommunittaan on taappi. Mä olin ne oppitsekin mun aski, kun mä taapuikaan vitsikon, niin tämä kivu jaski. Kiva ei näitä ole kiittää, kamkaka kuukin, näks kaatokin, pitsik, matsitsik. Kaikki on niin, stage oli tomi, kun ei vaan maski. Mä se kispin aski, pievon snaamaan suuntisina maapahtami. Kiva ei kun ei puhutaks tästä kiva tekit siitämi. Että ei siinä inno ovutsi, ovasti tapmaat sen utoa, myymaat sen utoa. Mene, kuitsumaan. I guess I was just asking in Cree here, it's the questions, I was just kind of elaborating in Cree what I was going to ask. I guess like as a teenager, my dad taught me basically the way to hunt, right? He basically educated us in, or myself anyway, the behaviors of the moose. How they are, how to recognize a cow moose versus a bull moose, just by tracks and how they browse. I know that still today. That was an education part, going on 30-some years. I don't think moose have evolved to trick me now. They're still the same. They're still there. That education still applies. So, and going forward, when you're talking about the sustainability and basically the landmarks that we value, right? So, in going forward, let's say use education land. What are those monuments or those shrines that we have to resurrect that has to be stable there in order for a brighter future for our children, our grandchildren? What are those? Is it legislation? Is it statutory, First Nations legislation, statutory funding? What are those things that there's continuity there, right? I know the importance of math, sciences, social, that's about, math is not going to change either. Once you grasp that doesn't change either. English, same thing. Social, it's relationship building. I guess a lot of times we're at a point now where, we have to have technology, I don't know a lot of stuff, like I only went to grade 9 in school. But, I can sure find out. They give me a little time, I can Google it. I'll know. It's not that I know, but I can find out. I know how to find out. So, are we going to establish an education system, a Google system going forward? Are we going to establish an education system that's actually based on facts and the education of our people? Because that's what brings, strength and stability. So, I guess the question is, what are those landmarks in education land that in First Nations country, let's never mind the province, never mind the feds for now, let's think about our future and the future of our children. It's kind of like an ad hoc education that we've received to date since treaty. So what do we need to do basically to, that's the question I have. Thank you.
I want to let you know the last moose I saw had an iPad. You asked a very important question, and that's something we need to all think about. What is it that we want to as you put it, what are those foundations that we need to pass on to the children? We can put it in a different way. What do we really want our children to know? Well, first and foremost is, like I was saying, language. Just like the TRC kept bringing up that we have to teach the language. And they're challenging universities and schools, teachers, and so on about being able to incorporate native language programs into their schools and colleges and universities. Language is first and foremost, because that's what gives you that Cree way, Dene way of thinking, Blackfoot way of thinking. So language is very, very important. Okay. Now, let me just add that in addition to just the language, if we wanted to bring in the notion of science, okay, did you know that quantum physics, which is, only real educated Western scientists know about and talk about, but did you know that their way of thinking in quantum physics is the same as Cree and Blackfoot? Their thinking is very, very similar. So in other words, that's one of the reasons why I have always said in 50, 60 years or so, hopefully I'm still around, Native people are going to be out in the forefront of science because we already have that mindset. Their quantum physics and native ways of thinking are very, very similar. Okay? So, the language is very important. Well, when we're talking about what is it that we want our kids to know, well, a culture consists of basically three things. Number one, it consists of what I refer to as a philosophy. In other words, that's the theoretical aspect of culture. The culture consists of customs. In other words, customs are the accepted ways of doing things. And lastly, a culture consists of values. Okay. Values are values are kind of interpretive tools, but values are also, incentives. Okay. So in other words, it's basically telling the people, if you live up to the culture, and if you follow our cultural ways, and you live by these values, you're going to be rewarded. You're going to be recognized. That's the role that social values play. Okay. This morning, what I was talking to you about was that philosophical aspect of the culture. What we need our children is to know that philosophical aspect, including the language, but we also want them to know those customs, the accepted ways of doing things. And lastly, We want them to know those values, those social values. So in many cases, for instance, when we talk amongst ourselves, we talk about generosity is one of the social values. And I jokingly say, geez, I don't think it would make a big difference if I were to win the Powerball jackpot, that just happened in the States, or for that matter, any lotto. I don't think it would make a big difference. Why? Because I'd have to share with everybody. Because generosity, sharing, is one of our values. Honesty, telling the truth, is very important. Because if you think back in our days, we didn't always write things down. We had a few little, writings and so on. But most of our relationships were based on truth, on honesty. If somebody says something, we have to believe that they're telling the truth. See, and that's one of the things that comes up with the treaties. When we enter into those treaties, we have to believe the other side, that is the Crown, the treaty commissioners, were telling the truth. See? So for us, the notion of honesty is very important. And seeing it's such that we believe, because of the relationship, we believe that if I were to say a lie over here or over there, that lie sticks there. And every time I come over there, I'm reminded of it. See? In Western thought, telling a lie is no big thing. Right? No big thing. Why? Because their reference point, remember, is time. Okay? So if I tell a lie today, 10 years down the road, nobody would remember. In other words, the lie disappears into the timeline. For us, if we were to tell a lie, it sticks to the earth and all our relations, the trees, the rocks, the bears, the birds, all remember. See, that's one of the aspects of social values. So, when you ask, what is it that we want our children to know? It's that philosophy that I spoke to you about this morning, and the customs, the accepted ways of doing things in Cree, in Dene, and Blackfoot, and those social values. That's what we want our kids to know. Thank you for your question.
So we'll have one more question or comment, and then we'll have a break.
Good morning. My name is Marie Adam. I'm ACFN member, but I live in Fort McMurray. I'm a mother of 5 children. I was a single mother from 71, and I raised my 5 children by myself. And my children, I can say I'm very fortunate. They're all educated. The oldest one is a social worker. My second one, she's jack of all trades. And my one and only son is a heavy-duty mechanic. And then his next sister, been with the industry for 26 years. And my youngest daughter, she's got her PhD in environment. And so education is something that I really strongly believe in. And in my way, I was brought up very traditionally. I grew up a lot of time with my grandparents. But the things that my parents had taught me, I had never forgotten. Never. And we didn't need a book where it was not written. It was written in our heart and in our mind, and verbally. And so when you're taught verbally, you don't forget. At least I didn't forget a lot of things that I was taught. And as for the language, when I was married, I was not allowed to teach my children my language, our children. And then when it didn't work out, but when I became a single mother, I just never did get into that odd words that my children know, understand, and my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren. So education, to me, is something that we treasure. Our culture way, I find that it's very, very important. Like I said, it's something you're taught, it stays with you. And the Western way, it's all in the book. You put that book away, 2 years down the road, you don't remember what you read. But our culture way, it's in here. And it never leaves us. So I really worry about the education, because I have 8 great-grandchildren that are going to be, like some of them are in school already. And then when their time to get, are we going to have any funding for them? This is one of the things that we have to really, really worry about. And like when my father, I grew up in Saskatchewan, right at the other end of Lake Athabasca, and many times we traveled by boat. We always did. In summertime, we lived off the land. And what we learned off the land, that's education. And you always had to make an offer to the water spirit, so we can have a safe journey across the lake. And these are the things I have never forgotten. And today, I still follow that. I always tell my grandchildren, my kid, to make an offer when they're traveling, cigarette or tobacco. And my granddaughter went to Egypt, her and her friend on a trip. I gave her a package of cigarettes. I told her, I said, every country that you pass, say a little prayer and leave a cigarette there. And so these are the things that I'm still following. And I believe in our education, like Western way of teaching. But sometimes it's hard. I am 77 years old, and I was in residential school, but not for a long time. And after that, I never started school again until I was about maybe 11 or 12. I didn't speak English. And these are the things that we had to learn in school. We were taught, we were pushed into it, that we could not speak our language. So no wonder so many of us have broken away, from our culture and our language. And to get back to treaty, I have a tape at home that my mother had, was recorded in the 70s. And in that tape, she said, when they were up there in 1899, they wanted to sign a treaty. And I guess whoever the government were, and the missionaries were there. And they were crying, begging our people to sign the treaty. And they kept saying no, they were not going to sign it. But eventually, there was an elder sitting, and I guess had this money, and she wanted to just see what it was made of, and she touched it. And that's how they said, oh, you took the money, and now you have to sign, now the treaty is signed. That's how in Fond du Lac area that's what had happened. And it's, you see, these are the things that were taking advantage of us. We didn't understand their language. And so they just took everything away from us right from the time. And yet we looked after them. We took care of them when they came from across. It wasn't for our First Nation people, many of them would not have survived. They would have starved to death, they would have froze to death, they would never have made that journey. And it was us being so generous, kind-hearted, like people that we are. And that's how they came and were looked after. Even in the 30s, my mother, I remember my grandmother and my mother, the hungry 30s, they were saying they were making dry meat, and it was put on a barge and shipped from waterways down south for people that were starving, didn't have nothing to eat. You see, we were still looking after them. And in my way of thinking, today we are still looking after them. And when are we going to be taken care of? And this is why I said that education, like I have 2 granddaughters in university in Calgary, one in Montreal, one in Calgary University. And one just started, the other one has 2 more years to go. And are they going to have work when they're done? This is another thing that we have to worry about in their category that they're taking. And then, like I said, I have 8 granddaughters, 8 great-granddaughters, and 2 great-grandsons. And these boys will be going into, they're done this year, they're high school. And then they're going to go into university or college or whatever that they choose to go to. And if they always going to be cut back, and then what's going to happen to them? My children had to borrow from student finance. My oldest daughter did, so did my youngest daughter, and the ones in between too. And then when they got a job, they had to pay back. And so now, my 8 great-granddaughters, you know, what's going to happen to them if they're not going to have this treaty rights to education and to health? But without education, in our culture way and the Western way, we will never get nowhere. We have to, the children have to help that. I really believe in giving the children, they have the right. Many of our children are hungry today. There's many places on our reserve that don't even have running water. You know, this is our country. This is ours. They should not have to live like that. They should never have to live like that. Because that's not our culture, eh? We always had a home. My father took care of that. We always had food, maybe not much, but I was happy as a child. And my daughter came home, my youngest daughter, here for Christmas. And you know what she said to me? She said, Mom, she said, when I was growing up, she said, we didn't have much. But she says, Mom, you know what? I was happy. You know, that really, really touched my heart. Because I always felt, being a single mother, that I never had enough to give to my children. This is what I always thought. You know, maybe I felt a little guilty about it. That as being a single parent, you can only do so much. But when she told me that, it really touched my heart. And she said, Mom, don't worry about things. And then she moved to Hawaii and left me in Fort McMurray, not cold weather. But, you know, that's part of life. And so I really think we should, I don't even know where to start, how to start to get the message across. I go to the schools, I'm asked for the schools in McMurray at times to tell the legends about the children, about what it was like, what it was like I was growing up and stuff like that. And I'm trying to get this message, how I grew up to the Western way of the children. And then, one of the little kids said to me, I don't believe you, because you have to have the TV, you have to have those games. I said, there was no such thing. But you see, that's the part of the education of you never, and like you said here, it's a lifelong learning. Like I said, I'm still learning today. And I will continue to learn as long as I live. And thank you very much. Marcy Church.
Just for information, Dr. Leroy Littlebear has to leave by, I'd say, in a few minutes. So we'll take one more question, and maybe he may stick around for a couple of minutes or so. So with that, we'll go with Elder Lawrence. You going to respond?
Thank you very much, Dr. It's always an honor to listen to you speak. Very informative, clear as a bell. What I want is talk about our leadership that are attending the conference today. You know, the way I look at it as an elder from our community, I see 4 obstacles here we have to deal with almost on a daily basis. Besides education, I'm talking about the Indian Act that controls us. I'm talking about the reserve concept we all live in. And I'm talking about Sir John A. Macdonald that put together our act together 249 years ago to say, if we want to change it, let's write it so they can change the way they're governed. And there's 600 or some reserves in Canada, and then each one of us all have to work individually. So how can we collectively all work together when we're so divided up with 600 different reserves? Now each reserve have their own priorities, so it's really I find it very difficult to get our leadership to be consistent, because, and then we're talking about education on top of that, and then they cut our funding, so our hands are always tied, And our elders will always come to these meetings. We're not really getting the results that we want, but I'm hoping today is a start. I like this concept of meeting, people having questions. With some of the facilitators that are on the panel, we're asking questions. I'd like to see more of those kinds of meetings. Thank you. Thank you.
You bring up, you know, I want to thank our grandma for her words and so on. But you also bring up a very important point, and it goes back to what she was saying too. Let me share, and let's straighten some things up. Okay. The general population, Canadian population, get the message that they're paying for Indians through their tax money. Okay. That's the general message that they get and that they receive and that they're walking around with. Okay. But that's very far from the truth. Okay? The truth is that all Indian monies, because of the Indian Act, go into what is known as the Consolidated Revenue Fund. What is the Consolidated Revenue Fund? The Consolidated Revenue Fund is the day-to-day cash flow that the government has and that it gets through taxation and so on. That's what it uses for taking care of all their expenses, all the programs, and so on, is through that Consolidated Revenue Fund. It's kind of like their checking account. Whenever anything comes up, hey, write a check for it. Comes out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund. Well, guess what? All Indian monies go into the Consolidated Revenue Fund. So who's paying the shot? We do. It's not taxpayers' money. We do. And just like if you go to a bank and you simply have a bank account that you use for daily expenses, the bank doesn't pay you very much interest on it, on just a regular bank account, okay? Well, that's where the 2% cap comes in. It's the 2% cap. In other words, the bank might only pay you 2% or so on your checking account. But same thing with government. That's why they only give you 2% increase. See? If all the leaders you're talking about were to get together and say, we want to take all our monies out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund and we want to invest our own monies, the government wouldn't let you do it. Why? Because they would be out that day-to-day cash flow. That day-to-day cash flow, large amount of it is paid for by Indian monies. See? So worrying about, the monies to pay for the education and so on. Well, how does the government take care of treaty rights? They take care of them through grants and contributions. Now, let me explain this very briefly. Grants and contributions is not limited to First Nations. Grants and contributions are government-wide. You know, it's a government-wide program. Those are all the programs that the government has. They slotted Indians into the grants and contribution programs. See, that's the reason why it looks like taxpayers paying for Indian programs. See? So, talking about getting together, yes, we like to make distinctions and say, well, we Cree are different, we Blackfoot are different, you Ojibways over there are different, and so on. When it comes to the government, there's no difference. It's the same all the way across. See, that's what our leaders have to realize. See, that's what they get to the government. There's no difference. It don't make any difference if you're Cree or Blackfoot or Ojibwe and so on. You're all the same. See? And talking about a new relationship, a new relationship has to be because those treaties, such as education, are part of the Constitution. They have to be paid by government on a constitutional basis, not as grants and contributions. See, that's what we have to realize. But see, as long as we don't bring that out, and we're just getting slotted into the national grants and contribution programs, it looks like taxpayers are paying our way. When in reality, it's our own money paying for treaty rights. That's what our leadership has to realize. And because to the government, we're all the same, it should be rather easy to come to a consensus about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Leroy Littlebear. Thank you for your presentation and saying how make it simple for us to understand, and at the same time, we're really interested. I can listen to you all day long and not fall asleep. So thank you, and thank the elders for everything that they provided, the prayers. So with that, we're going to take an early lunch, and we're going to start back here at 12:15. And continue from there. So with that, thank you very much again, Dr. Littlebear.